Okay. First of all, thank you guys so much for coming. I know it's like a Halloween night, but we really appreciate you guys showing up today. So today's lesson is going to be on React events and state. So just continuing in our kind of React series from last week. Okay. And then as always, please fill out this sign-in form. Okay. Perfect. Oops. And then also, if you guys want to get points on the membership website, then this is just going to be the code for today. Okay. And then, yeah, as we just said before, this week is going to be focusing on specifically React events and state management. And then also just a note, we recommend not coding along during the workshop. We'll have designated 5-minute breakpoints where you guys can fill in the code afterwards. But yeah, we recommend just following along because we think that's like the best way to learn. Okay. And then also, if you guys want access to the slides, you can scan this QR code. And then this is also the access to the GitHub afterwards. Okay, all good. Okay, so this is just going to be an outline of today's lesson. We're first going to go over a recap of what we covered last week. Then we're going to go over arrow functions, callbacks, array destructuring, and then this will eventually lead into our topic of events and state. Okay, so this was our product from last time. As you guys remember, we created a simple web page where we had two greeting card components. And as we learn, components allow us to reuse code when they have repeated content on our pages. And so specifically for us, the greeting card component made it easy for us to reuse this same card layout. And then we could also re-render this or re-render each greeting card component with different props. And so specifically for our page, we passed in a message, image source, and image alt prop for each component. And props basically let us provide specific data to a component, allowing it to display unique content each time it's rendered. And so this is all great, but what if we wanted to allow users who visit our webpage to be able to say like interact with our cards by liking them, similar to how you would like an Instagram post or a YouTube video. And so this workshop is going to teach a very important concept in React called events and state, which basically let us make our components interactive and dynamics. And these components are the very foundation of dynamic web applications. And they just allow you to build a lot more engaging applications, just like a lot of popular social media platforms that you might engage with. And so specifically for us, instead of just having a static component, we're going to add a like button where users can press this button and then it's going to update the like count on our website. Okay. And so before we dive into making our web page interactive, we wanted to introduce something called arrow functions, which is a JavaScript/TypeScript feature that we'll be using a lot in React. And so arrow functions are specifically, or they're specially structured functions that basically provide a more concise way to write functions. And the key benefits are you don't need curly braces or the return keyword. They're simple and they improve readability. And they're also very convenient to pass into other functions because their syntax is so concise. And so this is just a comparison of a normal function versus an arrow function. So here we defined a simple square function that is going to accept a number parameter called num, and then we're simply going to return num squared. But if we wanted to make this a lot more concise, we can try to kind of transform it into an arrow function where you'll see there's no longer any curly braces, there's no return brackets. It's the same exact logic, but just the syntax is a lot more concise. And then the next thing we want to cover is something called callbacks. And so oftentimes in React, we need to pass a function as an argument to another function so that it can be executed later at the right time. And this is exactly what a callback is. They're called at the end of the original function, and arrow functions are commonly used as callbacks because their syntax is so concise. Because you wouldn't want to pass in like a very bulky function to another function. It's nice to just have more concise syntax. And so we're going to be going over a quick example. So here's a simple example of a callback function. And so imagine we have this function called process data, and we want to perform an action once that data has been processed, as the function name kind of implies. And so we can pass a callback function to process data that will run after the data is processed. And so, oops. Oh no. Process data, we see it takes two parameters. The first parameter is the data parameter, and then the second is our callback function. And so process data, we see that it doubles the data and then calls this callback function with the result. And so in our case, we have defined log result as our callback function that we will pass into process data to be called later. And so based off this slide, does anyone know what is going to be the result of this process data function? And feel free to just shout it out. Yeah, exactly. So we see here that this callback function that we call console log is the result is, and then we see with our result, we're just doubling the data. So exactly that. Okay. And then the very last concept that we wanted to go over was something called array destructuring. And so remember from last week that arrays let us store multiple values in a single variable. But does anyone know, or does anyone remember how we typically access an item in an array? Phew. Amazing. So yeah, indexing is great, but what if we wanted to assign variables to each element in our array? And so this is exactly what array destructuring does for us. We can extract the elements from an array and assign them to individual variables all in one line. And so here we've defined, all right, sorry. Oh no. Here we have defined this function called officers, and it returns an array of strings holding the names Azel, Sneha, and Caitlin. And so we can use array destructuring to assign values to each of the strings in our list. And so in this case, we're assigning it to the variables A, B, and C. And so if we were to console log A, B, and C, it would actually map to the strings in our array. So A would print out Azel, B, Sneha, C, Caitlin. Yeah. Okay. And so now that we've gone over those three important concepts, you might be wondering, what's the point of all of this? How does this even tie to React events and state? And so we're going to be going, of course, more in depth to events and state later, but just to plant some seeds in your head, one common use for arrow functions is to simplify something called an event handler, because as we said before, the syntax is very concise for this. So yeah. And then next, in terms of callback functions, they're often going to come yeah, they're often going to come in handy when we need to update data, maybe like changing text on a screen or updating a count. And so this will make sense when we discuss later how React handles data updates. And then finally, we just talked about array destructuring, which lets us extract items from an array in one line. And this will be particularly useful when we work with React's useState, which is a built-in React function that helps us track data, and it returns two particular values in array. And so basically array destructuring just makes it easier to work with useState's output. But again, this will make sense later on in the lesson. Okay, so now we're finally going to dive into our main topic of today. And so as we saw from our goal earlier, actually, this is not ready yet. When we clicked on a button, then something occurred. So when we clicked on the like button, I'll go back to it. When we click on this like button in each of our greeting card components, this like count is going to update. And so basically what happened is that this button click from the user triggered some type of action to occur, right? And so this is exactly what an event is. And so TypeScript will react to events such as a user clicking on a button, or maybe another example is they press on a certain key, and it's going to perform a desired action. And so these are some other examples of events on React. So we have on click and on key down. And there's plenty more, but you can feel free to look at documentation if you'd like to explore that more in depth. And so before we dive in, we thought it would be nice to do a quick little analogy for React events. And so imagine that a person visiting your home rings a doorbell. And so in this case, the doorbell ringing is the event. And then oh my God, opening the door is the action taken in response to that event. And so the person who opens the door is acting as essentially this event handler, performing an action when the event occurs, which is when the doorbell rings. And so just like as a doorbell rings and someone answers the door, React listens for these events and allows us to respond to them with specific actions using something called event handlers. Um, oops. And so in our case, the event is when a user clicks on the like button in our greeting card component. And so on click is something called an event listener that waits for the click event on this button to occur. And then when a user clicks on the button, it triggers the event. It triggers the event. And so handle click is going to be our event handler that tells React what to do in response to this click. And so by setting on click to handle click, we're essentially telling React that when this button is clicked, then we're just going to run this handle click function. Does that all make sense so far? Yeah. Okay, great. So, oops. Now we're going to go on to the actual coding part of our workshop. And so let me switch screens really quickly. Okay. If you guys were following along from last week, oh, sorry. My first time doing this. Okay. If you guys were following along from last week, this is going to be the exact same code base from session 3. And so first we're going to want to create an event. And so first let's define our event handler. So we're gonna write it above our return statement. And so let's name our event handler called handle like. So we're gonna do const handle like. We're going to be using our arrow function that we just learned. And then for now, let's just say that whenever the user clicks on a button, we're just going to console log button was clicked. Okay. And then we also want to create the actual button component in our greeting card. So we're just going to add that right below the H2 tag that we had last time. So let's create a button component. And then we are going to just call this in our button. We're just going to say like, and then we're going to pass in our event listener and event handler. So we're going to say on click, set that equal to handle like that we just wrote. And then also we can just apply I'm just going to apply some really quick styling to our button just to make it a little bit more pretty. But feel free to reference the GitHub for any like CSS styling. So styles. Okay. So next we're going to run this. Okay. Wait, sorry. I should. Okay. And then now that we see that we've added our event handler, we have this nice little like button here. And so I'm gonna go to our console, and then we'll see that whenever we like the button, um, it's gonna say button clicked, because that is the action that we wanted to take whenever our button was clicked. Yeah, so now you guys are just gonna spend 5 minutes to implement your um events so far. Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. Um, okay, yeah. And then feel free, if you need any help, then you can just wave down any of our officers. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. Mm-hmm. Wait, guys, is the link in the Discord? Okay, we're gonna put the slides link in the Discord right now. Okay, so hopefully you guys have all successfully implemented the event in your website so far. But now we're going to move on to the second part of this workshop, which is state. And so before we dive into that, we wanted to ask, what is a static website? And so a static website basically displays content that doesn't change in response to a user's action. And so whatever is displayed on the screen, it stays the same no matter what. So you can kind of think of it as like taking a screenshot where like it's fixed, it doesn't react to any type of user interactions. But if we could re-render, we could essentially have the app refresh itself to show new information in response to user actions. Um, but the problem is that using just a normal TypeScript variable by itself isn't enough to do this. And so we would need some bothersome TypeScript code to do that. But what if I told you that React can help us fix this with relatively minimal work? And so this is exactly what state is. State is probably one of the most important components is because it's basically what allows us to build interactive web pages. And so you can basically think of state as a piece of data that belongs to a specific component. And each component can have its own state, which it manages and updates as needed. And yeah, so the key point is state is dynamic. It can change over time based off of user actions or other events. And then we also wanted to have a small aside on React hooks. And so a hook is simply a special function provided by React that allows us to hook into React features within function components. And so React simplifies the complicated details of JavaScript or TypeScript by handling a lot of the work for you. So you don't have to write all that messy code to manage the state of your object. React kind of gives you this blueprint for building components. And so there are several hooks available, but one of the most commonly used one is use state, which lets you add state to function components. And so this is the one that we're going to use today, and this is how we import use state from React. But then we're not going to implement use effect in React today, but we just wanted to briefly mention that use effect is another popular hook used in React. And so basically, use effect is used whenever we want to run side effects in response to changing states or prompts. So like an example could be if you wanted to update like an external database or like set a timer, you would kind of want to listen for whenever those things change. And so that is what use effect would be used for. But just to kind of explain this concept a little bit more clearly. I know it can be a little bit tricky, like especially differentiating like use state and use effect. Like I know that's like a confusion of mine personally. We've created a simple example kind of tied to our event, or sorry, tied to our app. And so here in this case, the use effect hook is set to run every time the like state changes, and it logs the updated count to the console. And so here we see we have something called a dependency array, which basically tells React that this use effect hook will only run when this like likes dependency array changes. Okay. And then alongside built-in hooks like use effect and use state, React also allows us to create custom hooks. And so custom hooks let us extract and reuse logic that might otherwise be duplicated across multiple components. So like, for example, if we wanted to like fetch data, if we had several components that were fetching data from a same data source, then we could wrap that logic in a custom hook. And so you can think of custom hooks as just functions that use other hooks. And their names like typically start with like the use word. And so we're not going to be implementing a custom hook today, but that's just something, if you guys are curious, you can feel free to look at this link that details that documentation a little bit further or a little bit more in detail. Okay. And so back to use state, which is well the hook that we're going to be using today. Um, we see that this is how we define state variables. And remember to define them. We need to do it before our return field in our component. And also something to note is that they can be used with any data type. In this example here, we see that we're using it with numbers, but it could also be used with like booleans or strings. And so the array syntax for use state is an example of array destructuring that we went over previously in our lesson. And so React's use state hook returns an array with two components. The first component is the current state, which we have identified by this count variable. So this is the actual variable that can get updated. The second component is the like state updater function. In this case, we call it set count. And then third component to this is in order to kind of set an initial count value, use state and then 0 initializes the state with 0. And it also specifies that this count should be a number. Yes. Okay. And then also all we have to do in order to update our state is when we're defining our function that's going to update our state, we're just going to assign some type of value to it. So in this case, if we wanted to basically increment the count with our set count function, we'll just pass in count plus 1. And so that is what is going to update our original state value. And so if we were to console log from the get-go count, it's just going to output 0 because that is what we set our initial value to. And then whenever we trigger some type of event that is going to change the count, it's going to increment the count by 1. And then once again, afterwards, if we were to console log it, it would resultantly output 1. Okay. And so now we're going to move on to states demo so that when we actually click the button, it's not just going to console log that the button was clicked. We're actually going to update the light count on our website. So let me switch over again.
Is a state a type of variable or
the state of something, and that is like represented with like the value of the variable. And by changing the state, you like practically update the value. So it's like more like an abstract.
Yeah, you can, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So like, yeah, you can think of state as just kind of like a piece of data that each of our component holds. And so if we want to like manage the state, such as like updating the light count for our greeting card component in this example, state is kind of like React sort of way of allowing us to manage that, if that makes sense. Okay. Okay, so we're going to go back to our code and actually implement state so then we can dynamically render the light count. And so the very first thing we want to do is up at the very top, we want to import state. So we're going to do import use state from React. I think sometimes, yeah. So we just want to do that in order to allow us to actually use state. And then we're going to define our use state array. So we'll do that. We want to do it before the return statement. So we can do it before our handle like function that we just defined. So the syntax, once again, is going to be, we're going to set basically our state variable, the function that's going to update our state. So we can call it like set likes. And then we want to basically set an original or initial value to our light count. So we could do use state and specify the data type because we're in TypeScript. And then we'll just set that to 0. Okay. And then instead of just console logging that the button was clicked, instead we're going to update the state on the button click. And so we can do set likes, and then we're just going to increment like by 1. Actually, I'm gonna change this to likes. Okay. And then, yes, I believe that should be it. Oh, also we have to add like a little like text in order to show that our like is actually being updated. So we can create a short little p tag here. And so we'll pass in our like state variable. And then let's see. We're going to just sorry. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I believe that should do it. And so if we were to run this again, sorry, let me,
Oh, to do set to run the sub like function on thing and also instead of syntax like likes comma set likes really
so basically like, that's just like the syntax that use state gives us. It's basically just an array where the first variable is going to be like our state variable. And then the second one is going to be our function that is gonna update the state. I believe so, right?
yeah so
So
like
if you want like multiple functions to like kind of like change the value of the state variable, what you can do is you build multiple wrapper functions around the function that React supplies you. So what's like React supplies is basically a function that if you pass in the argument, it will set the variable should be the value of that argument. But if you want to, for example, you increment by one, you can just build a wrapper function and set that, whatever you pass in. Or like you don't have to pass in anything. I'll just set the current value to be like value plus one, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure if that's what you're asking for, but apparently if you're just using like the current syntax, React will only provide you with one single function. And if you want more like functionalities, more like granularity, more details, you have to build your own function set around that. Yeah, I think one condition that I can think of as of right now is you have like a wrapper function and you pass in certain condition or argument and you have like a if else statement and if certain kind of condition is achieved or like is satisfied, you run the function that React supplies with one certain argument and if it doesn't supply, you run the function with another argument.
but set like state for
I don't think so.
um
You can only set likes to be the value that you want to set up. It doesn't set value.
that likes has to be like just a function that is able to this has to be
It takes the new value that you want to assign to the like.
yeah practice syntax.
Yeah, of course. Mhm.
Yeah, so I think based on what you asked, what you can do is something like, instead of just const handle like with no parameters, you can do like const like handle like some kind of condition. And if that condition is true, we can do set likes equals to, or set likes plus one. And if it's not satisfied, you can do set likes minus one. So that's like somewhat like a wrapper function that achieves multiple functionalities.
Then in that case, that concludes our workshop for today. Feel free to stay. Oh, no. Feel free to stay back if like you have any more questions or you want to keep working. Oh, I thought you said no. Sorry. But yeah, thank you guys for coming today. We really appreciate it. We hope you have a good rest of your Halloween. And then yeah, if you guys want to stay connected with us, feel free to scan this link tree. It links you to our Instagram, the website, Discord, all that good stuff. And yeah, we're gonna be continuing on this workshop, I believe, until week 8, 9. Yes. Okay, sounds good. But yeah, we'll post all those updates on our social media. But yes, that concludes our workshop. So thank you guys.